Next session, we have William Moore, and his presentation is on English Grammar Uncloaked. William holds his TESOL diploma and Masters of Education. He has taught English as a second and foreign language, as well as English for academic and specific purposes for over 20 years now, and his career took him around the world, including Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates and Canada, of course. And again, the age span of his learners has varied from adult immigrants to traveling and military use, and even a few children. Over the years, William has developed an alternate view of English verb system, which he's going to talk about in the next hour. So thank you, William, for making this today, and we are really looking forward to your session.
Thank you very much.
I will pass the presenters right over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Yes. Thank you very much for participating. Is English Grammar Uncloaked? Today I'm going to talk very specifically about one particular aspect of English. I'm going to start with this question. And if any of you think you have an answer to that, I would be happy to hear that now in the chat box. Well, in order to answer this question, we first have to look a little deeper, and we have to understand three aspects of grammar that don't receive a lot of attention. Elision, underlying form, and surface form. And these are normally applied to phonetics, but they actually apply to the structure of the language as well. The reason that I am happy is a correct statement that the underlying grammar, what we understand, is I am a happy person. We don't need to speak the a person or write it, because the fact that I refers to a person mostly, unless we're writing novels and literature. So we have the surface form and the underlying form. I'm sorry, I have these backwards. The first sentence, I am happy, is the surface form, and the second, underlying form. The unnecessary words have been elided, and sometimes this is called conciseness. Another example might be the dropping of your name. I don't need to repeat your name if I'm communicating with you. Once it's established that we are communicating, that information is dropped. So this is paramount to understanding what's happening in our grammar. It's not that adjectives can follow the be verb. It's that the noun has been elided. Do I have any comments on that?
Can you explain a bit more what surface means, and does it mean essential?
Yes. Surface form refers to what we say and what we write. It's what we see, the surface. But our minds are behind that, and so the underlying form is what we understand from what we see or say or hear. So when I say I am happy, my mind is quite capable of understanding that that means I am a happy person, the correct grammar. We don't speak grammatically. We don't write in absolute grammar. We take shortcuts all the time. One of the shortcuts that we take. So this comes into play. You cannot explain grammar by referring to the surface form. So this is the first thing that need to grasp. Moving on, we have to look at our verbs in a structured way. The current trend is upside down and back to front, relative to what I learned as a young boy. In the late 50s and the early 60s, primary verbs were taught, and they were simply described as being the first verb. Secondary verbs were all the other verbs. They, main verbs, primary verbs are called auxiliaries or helping verbs. And I find that to be quite unhelpful. What we have are the three aspects of reality: distance, action, and time. Each of these introduces or predicts what the following words are going to be about. So what we have the irregular verbs, and there's only just over 100 of those. We have thousands of regular verbs. And verbs exist in families. These words all mean the same thing, but they play different grammatical roles. The primary verb families play quite a different role from the regular secondary verbs, form a different function, and they should not be included in the same table of irregular verbs as the other secondary irregular verbs. I find this very confusing for learners of English. It took a long time to sort out what was actually happening beneath the surface. But one of the keys to looking at this is looking at positive, negative, and question when you try to understand the grammar of something. So when we're using the primary verbs, we have this pattern set. I am a teacher, not a teacher. Am I a teacher? He is. And if we only look at the subject and the primary verb, the pattern is identical. And what this says is that one of the first functions, primary verbs, is the formation of negatives and questions. Positive, of course. All negatives and questions are formed with the primary verbs. That's their function. Secondary verbs never form negatives or questions. Don't say, I work not, I play not. Play you the violin? These verbs do not form negative questions. They appear to form positives when we say, I work at HCT. He works at HCT. Or he worked at HCT. There's something else going on that relates to elision. Let's just go a little further. I want to talk now about this aspect. This is what causes confusion. If we take our subjects, line them up, and we include names and common nouns so that we have a first person, second person, third person singular, and going down the list of subjects, we have the first person, second person, and third person plurals. Primary verb is elided, dropped. It's unnecessary because we all know that these verbs are action verbs. We don't need in the positive primary verb. Need it, we drop it. But the S of does is suffixed onto the secondary verb. What we see is he works. She dances. It goes. What's happening behind the scenes, that the primary verb is elided. We can take a shortcut here. S or ES of does, suffixed onto the end secondary verb. I looked at this for a long time before I questioned, does this happen anywhere else in our language? Is this the only instance of this? Any way that I can find another example so that my explanation isn't just a one-off? Yes, past tenses. Don't need to say I did play, you did come. Say I played. Ed, or the ud sound of did, is suffixed onto the end secondary verb. Of course, with the irregulars, that doesn't happen. They remain. But a lovely study has been done by some folks down at Harvard. Shows the irregular verbs are slowly converting regular verbs. This is why we have examples where we have learned and learnt, burned and burnt. These verbs are the ones undergoing the change now. And they've actually postulated a half-life is relative to the frequency of usage. More frequently the verb is used, the slower it changes. But it might be the other way around. I'll have to go back and look at that to get it clear in my head. These verbs are changing slowly. So there is a second example of elision with suffixation onto the secondary verb. And so I felt this is a far better explanation in the overall. Are there any questions on that at this stage? So one of the reasons that I started looking for alternative explanations, this page, I had been teaching for a few years and purchased a book at a used store, not a store, actually in a library where they were raising money. Good question. Why are there regular verbs? Get into that before I explain this page. We have two sets of verbs that come to us apparently through the German language. And a long time ago, they were described as strong and weak. Weak verbs add ed on the end. I don't know what they mean by weak or strong, but that can be researched. So we've always had the ed verbs, and we've always had the irregular or strong verbs. So it's very old. The ed form is the one that has grown, while the irregular list has shrunk considerably. So one day, looking through this wonderful grammar book, you notice it's by Gorell and Laird, published in 1956, called A Modern English Handbook. Lovely name. Published by Prentice Hall. And I just was flipping through the book and I spotted this page where it says the simple present tense, not usually used for this purpose. And that struck me as odd. Not used for this purpose. Used to indicate customary action. Further down the page came the answer. Progressive or continuous. Uncommon in English until the 18th century, 1700. Progressive verbs are now probably the most common for expressing the simple present. But that said to me this. About 300 years ago, as we stood at the barbecue, our steaks, we said, I cook steak now. But about 250 years ago, began saying, I am cooking steak now for the same situation. Present progressive placed the simple present in its role. So, if I may use you, Juliana, as an example, perhaps 10 or 20 years ago, you were president of charity or a company, but you were replaced 9 years ago by somebody else who now performs that function. Should I still call you president? Why are we still calling the simple present tense when it no longer performs that function? This was a question that really, really struck me. Read the comment. It's no wonder that they have trouble understanding that the simple present isn't used for the simple present. We are the ones at fault, not they. We are the ones who explain our language poorly. They understand simple. They understand present. They understand tense. They don't understand. 250 years ago, we changed the way we speak. So I started looking. I found one totally different aspect than the verbs and worked on that for a number of years. But eventually, I had to come to these verbs. And I need now to go to slide here. Yes. When I began teaching my students using this full list of subjects, I saw the elision of do. And at that point, I was able then to move beyond that. So, looking at that and this, I looked at the be verb and the do verb and the have verb. And I realized that when a be verb is involved, we're really describing the background of a picture. We are talking about a context in which actions and time take place. The statement, I am a teacher, it engenders a number of images. If a young woman says, I'm a teacher, our mind takes into account the age, the gender, the appearance, the ethnicity, the institution they might be associated with. Depending on what we know, this statement will mean different things. An older man says, I'm a teacher, we might envision a completely different context. So that the be verbs provide us with the background. They say this is just a statement. There's no action here. It's a description of a context. But when we use do verbs, we have an action. We have no context. Just have, I drive a car. Action, focus. If we want to have an action in a context, we have to say, I am driving a car. So we are now able to communicate strictly about context, strictly about action, or about action in a context. And when we go have primary verbs, the have primary verb signals that the following words are going to involve a span of time. And the focus may be on the end point of time or on the span of time. We can, depending on the other words, we can refer to a past event as a singularity, or we can refer to the time since that event. But time, the major focus. Statement I have been teaching for over 30 years. We know immediately that the young woman is not making that. From all of this, what I derived was that English has three dimensions. Be, do, have. And if we understand that the primary verbs predict a contextual focus, that the do primary verbs will be elided in the positive only, remain in the negative and question. They predict, or the lack of them predicts, action. And that the have primary verbs predict a time or temporal focus to our statement. We can start to actually have a structure that makes sense. The trend today is to say, oh, English is a polyglot language. And really, you know, there's no structure. You just have to learn it. Don't worry about it. Or we teach the 12 tenses and laboriously and misleadingly talk about things that don't tie together. Today's grammar doesn't tie together. The view that I have put together is holistic, doesn't have those contradictions in it as far as I can see. I would be quite happy to have anybody point out gaps or contradictions. I believe that we need to start teaching English in a different way. We have to stop using terms like the simple present tense. That's simply pointing in 4 directions at once, none of which are correct. Take the set of all basic English sentences, simple ones first. You can have 3 divisions. There is a division in 2, but it involves each of these. That is with conditionals. I noticed today that we have helping modal verbs. I'm going to get into helping modal verbs, but really I must. We begin with I am, and then we add the conditional I should be, or I should work, or I should have been, should have worked. So the conditional exists across all 3 of these. It's the division into 2. Can't have it until we have these 3. And of course, in a single sentence, we cannot have a real action, such as he works, and a conditional action. Once the condition is on there, he must disappear. So there is a basis for calling the modals helping modal verbs, but it doesn't, the Band-Aid, it doesn't really help people to understand. You can't have a conditional action, a real action, in the same words. So that the do is replaced by those conditionals. But they are not verbs. They are conditionals. Good question. Actually, in the verbs, if we look at verbs alone, there are only 2 tenses. There's the past and not the past. I can use the same verb form if I go to my blank page here. Blank page. Add text. Here. If I communicate, I am going to Paris, we all interpret that as meaning now. Convention is that unless a specific time is stated, now is the default. But I can use exactly the same verb forms. I can say tomorrow. Now it's a future. Cannot attribute present to this verb form, am going. Am does not indicate the present. It indicates not the past. So as far as our verbs are concerned, there are only 2 tenses, past and not the past. But with convention, and convention is absolutely essential, we have to first agree that we will use I am going to Paris to mean now by default, or we can alter it, add the word tomorrow to make it a future statement. So English only has 2 tenses in its verb system. So that's why we add S or an ES some verbs and not to others. The elide, the do, we elide the do or the d, and we suffix the final sound of our primary verb onto the secondary verb. First have to learn 12 or L2. 12 tenses. Yes, well, the original explanation of the 12 tenses involved the word aspect. And when I learned about the primary verbs back in the late 50s, early 60s, it was called the present tense simple aspect, or the past tense perfect aspect. This was shortened to past perfect. And then it was called a tense by itself. Yes, and that is because in today's usage, it must include both. But if you drop the 12 tenses and go with 3 dimensions, action and time, wind up with another situation that really simplifies the language. Blank page. I scroll along. It just scroll here. There it is. There it is. If I go back to my blank page, I'll just put in a couple more text boxes. We can pass that. Statement I drive to work is a statement in the do dimension. Know this because the negative is I do not drive to work. Always test for the by forming a question or a negative. But statement drive was the wrong one to use. Let me try another one here. Drive being an irregular, it doesn't follow the pattern I need to show you. I work for a living. What about the statement I am worked for a living? I'd like to put that below, but when I use the Enter key, I see that it allows. Statement in the do dimension, I work, indicates that I'm the one doing the doing. Statement I am worked is called a passive in the current explanation. But we talk about ongoing as a verb form. I am working. And we never consider that in the statement, I am working, we translate or we interpret the words from the left to the right. I am working means I'm the one doing the doing. I am worked, which is the only other option after the be verb. We can only have the ing or the ed form after a be verb. Can't have the root form. I am worked reverses the application, the action. That is, somebody is making me work. They're earning a living doing it. What we have is an ongoing and a reflective ed suffix causes a reflection, a reversal, the action. And if I say, I worked, the reversal is not in the direction of the application of the action, but the reversal is in time. And so we have a rule that we can apply across the dimensions. When ed follows or exists in the B dimension, the application of action, or there is a reflection of the direction of action. But in the do dimension, where the rules are different, ed causes a reflection of time. This also applies to adjectives. ing means that the man, one doing the doing. An interested man means that it's happening to him. And this is really the topic for another entire workshop. But I thought I would throw that in at the end. So I've been doing this for a long time. One of the reasons that I don't follow the regular trend is that this was my home growing up, very isolated from the mainstream. And this was my elementary school. One teacher, one room, all elementary grades, up to grade 8 until I got there. So I could always see where my education was leading me. Look ahead at the grade 5s when I was in grade 3. When I was in grade 5, I could look at the work that grade 7s were doing. See that my education had purpose, that I had to learn what I was learning so that I could really do what they were doing. When I entered university for the first time, one of those late night sessions sitting around in the union at UBC, this was born. I leave you with this. Be is to have been, was to soon be, will be, soon have been.